Okay, well, it's about that time. Let's get started. Good evening. I am Anna Tragesser. I'm Artist and Community Services Manager at the Indiana Arts Commission, and I'm excited to talk Individual Advancement Program with y'all tonight. If you would go ahead and mute yourself. For me, I'm on my computer, and there's a black bar that appears near the bottom of my screen, and on the left of that bar is a microphone icon, and if you click it, it mutes. I also have the power to mute you. Blah. So I might do that if we get some feedback throughout the call. So once again, good evening. You all are mostly muted for this webinar, but I'm going to pause throughout the discussion. Well, I guess throughout my lecture here, it's not really much of a discussion, and see if you have any questions. So. And there will be plenty of time near the end to answer any questions, and you should never hesitate to give me a call if you still have lingering questions as you're processing some of this information. So welcome, and let's get started. Okay. Well, actually, the first thing I'd love for you to do is in the chat box, if you would type your name and your hometown or what county you're coming from, that way we have a better sense of who's in the room. Okay. Well, before we get started, I can see a lot of you, which is awesome. Before we get started, would you wave at me if this is the first time that you have ever applied for a grant, or say it in the chat box. Okay, first time you've ever applied for an Indiana Arts Commission grant. Oh yeah, okay, awesome. We got some grant newbies. This is gonna be a lot of fun. Well, I hope that at least you've found us, so you know something of us. We're your state arts agency. Every state has an arts agency that funds and supports artists and arts organizations. And we are funded by the Indiana General Assembly and the National Endowment for the Arts. So that's both your state and federal taxpayer dollars. We take this job pretty seriously. We have quite a few processes set up to make sure that this is a fair and transparent process for you to be able to receive these funds. So I'm going to walk you through that today. And again, you saw my contact information over here, and it's all over the website as well. Don't ever hesitate to get in touch if you have questions. So our vision is the arts everywhere, every day for everyone in Indiana. And we make hundreds of grants every year to artists and arts organizations across the state, both to well, I said it already, artists and arts organizations. And we believe that when artists are thriving, then their communities will benefit, and so will the whole state. So we know that you're out there hustling, and most of you are doing it as a self-employed creative or on your own. No matter what your creative approach is or what your past experience has been in the arts, give yourself a high five right now. I'm serious, because this is a big deal. You showing up to this moment to decide that you're gonna go get it. Thank you for doing that. We believe in you, and I'm excited to get to know you better. So we've got a few different types of support that you might be interested in. The three main programs for primarily individual artists are the On-Ramp Creative Entrepreneur Accelerator. It's not only a grant, it's actually a first training, business training and entrepreneurship with a cohort of about 35 people. The other is this one that you found, the Individual Advancement Program, which is a career development project-based grant. And finally, Arts in the Parks and Historic Sites, where artists can be funded to do a site-specific participatory arts project in a state park or a state historic site. But you have found the Individual Advancement Program. And before you apply for any grant, do a gut check. Here's 3 questions for you. Who am I as an artist right now? What do I tell people when they ask me what I do? What do I create? What do I transform? What do I imagine? What do I destroy? Who's involved in that? And when and where does it happen? Who am I as an artist right now? The second question you should ask yourself is, how do I want to answer that question in the future? And you can define future however you want. But really, what do I want? Do I want to be doing this stuff all the time? Do I want to be doing it alone? Do I want to build a partnership with like a fabricator or collaborator? Do I want to be doing this stuff with a different material in a different place, in a different world, so to speak? And then thirdly, what is the next step? How do I want to answer this question in the future? Therefore, what's the next step? And you may have to plan out all the steps in order to figure out what the next step is. But the more specific you can be about the next step, the more ready you are for a grant proposal. If you're ready to apply for a grant, here's some tips that I recommend no matter what grant you're applying for from us, no matter which of one of our grants or from anyone else that you encounter, any other funder you encounter. First of all, which is not on there, start early. That's always a big tip, right? It's always gonna trip you up. There might be some things that you didn't expect to provide, or you need to wait on other people to help you with. But next, know what this grant is trying to support. The best place to get those answers is in the criteria, which we'll talk about in a moment. And every grant should have guidelines, which are the rules and requirements for how the funding can be used. Read through the guidelines every time. Don't skip that step. It might change the way that you want to approach your grant, or it might make you realize that it's not a good fit, maybe based on some kind of requirement. Next, which of my needs or ideas is the best fit for then what the grant is looking for? Does it even match? If it doesn't match, clearly, don't waste your time on it. And if you have to change your idea in order to fit the grant, does it still allow you to do what you need to do? And that's your call. That's totally on you to decide what's worth it. But if it doesn't allow you to do what you actually need to do, then walk away. That's the best advice I can give you as a program manager, somebody who wants you to get this money, is pick the right grant, because there's lots of funding opportunities out there for you. Before I go any further, do you have any questions so far? That was pretty short. Cool, let's keep going. So it's my goal today that you are ready to apply for the Individual Advancement Program. This is a grant program that's meant to support your career development. You can start your application now. It's open, it's ready for you. But it's due on February 6th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget that. So today we're going to talk about this program's goal and purpose, who can apply to it, what you should expect from the public funding process, and of course, some tips on writing a strong application. Most of what I'm going to be talking about today can be found again in the guidelines, which I mentioned before. I'll show you how to find those guidelines right now. But again, this meeting is being recorded and we'll be posting it everywhere that links can be found and sharing it with you. So let me just go ahead and pull up the Individual Advancement Program webpage. I first went to in.gov/arts, which is where you find your favorite arts agency in the state of Indiana. And on the left-hand side of the page, under programs, you can see all of the grant programs and training programs we have available. Clicking on the Individual Advancement Program, you're going to be applying for fiscal year 2021, that cycle. And that's where I can find the guidelines. You can download a PDF version if you like to print things out and mark it up. That's great. And then this page just has some quick details that you might want to flip back to from time to time. Okay. All right. So if a disability prevents you from being able to read those guidelines, or English is maybe not your native language, if you need any assistance at all accessing information online or our online system, please let me know. We'll be happy to make accommodations for you. So the Individual Advancement Program benefits supports projects that have a positive impact on your artistic career, on any phase of your artistic career, and directly benefits Hoosiers or an Indiana community. So here are some examples of projects that have been funded in the past. Actually, let me get back to that. I first want to touch on, we mentioned before, part of like mutual benefit or benefits Hoosiers, and we think of that in terms of community engagement. Those two words are pretty loaded and also used really often that it's hard to understand like what someone's really looking for when they talk about community engagement. And we're really clear exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for an active, two-way, ongoing relationship between you and a community. In the planning phases or the participation or an evaluation of the activities that you're doing, that might include intentional strategies for diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. And a community, of course, can be defined in lots of ways, maybe by geography, by some kind of attribute or identity, or some kind of affinity, something that you share together. Why do we care about that? Because it works. Our goal is to support the arts and culture sector in Indiana. Community engagement, this type of a mutually beneficial relationship with your home state, with the community in your home state, increases support for your work here. And we believe that arts are for all. And so by building this kind of a relationship, it increases access to art for folks all over the state by understanding what they enjoy, how they participate in arts and culture, or how they're creative. And we have lots of tools to help you keep thinking about this. I'm going to go back to the web to show you that on our webpage, under what we do, you can find a lot of different topics. But when you click on community engagement, you can find a little bit more information about what we're looking for, what we're asking for. Especially, you're going to want to check out this video, which is defining community engagement for individual artists. And I'm blocking, YouTube's blocking it right now. Well, that's a good video you should be watching, but apparently the state of Indiana doesn't want me to be watching it right now. Okay, it won't block you, don't worry. Okay, now let's talk about some examples of things that have been funded in the past. A ceramic artist built a studio with some additional contributions outside of the grant that he received. He said, I now have a fully operational studio to create my work in that's independent of the universities I work at. Having a studio located away from distractions and near my home will allow me to push my work in new and exciting directions without the fear of being pulled away from my work during studio time. In addition to that piece of his career development, the project had tremendous community engagement and opportunity for public benefit. That's because he also, in partnership with a local studio, a local community arts organization, located his studio right next door to this community art space. And as a result, the artist and the organization share a kiln shed. And that turns out that space could also be used for large scale public art. And it's now part of a regional pottery tour that brings tourists from the city outside of the state, and it adds to the local First Friday spread. Just by starting that conversation with local partners about what he was working on, was able to go way beyond what he initially imagined could be possible for his career development, but was directly, want you to know that first and foremost, this is for your career development, but there are inherently lots of ways that you can simply by looking for mutually beneficial partnerships and relationships, go even further there. Secondly, a wood turner acquired a lathe for his shop and took a course with a well-known wood turner. They were able to use the works that they made in this experience to secure 2 solo exhibitions, and they taught this newly developed skill to local high school students at a local free art day event. And a visual artist bought supplies and covered expenses for a residency with this grant in order to accomplish a goal of creating over 50 pieces of work, which she could exhibit in a local art gallery. And she donated several pieces to the local Habitat for Humanity for new homeowners to hang in their home. And in the process, built some deeper connections with the residents in those homes and was inspired by their stories, and that actually impacted her creative process going forward. So you may already have an idea in mind for this grant. Remember that it should seem like a project that has a beginning and an end, or at least has a defined phase of a bigger project, right? So that will help you, first of all, of thinking about what should I apply for? Something that has a beginning and an end, you know when you've accomplished it, or you're taking a bigger project, chunking it into phases that have a beginning and end, and you're asking for money for one specific phase of it. That's clearly communicated. You can request up to $2,000. There's no match requirement. What you propose to spend the money on has to take place between July 1st, 2020 and June 30th, 2021. That's what we call fiscal year 2021. And you will have to comply with all state of Indiana requirements for grantees, like accessibility requirements, privacy considerations, contract clearance, payment schedules. I'll tell you right now, we make all of our grants in 2 payments. You receive 75% of your total grant at the beginning of the grant period, and then you will fill out a final grant report at the end of the grant period, or whenever or before that if you're finished early, and that's when you receive your second payment, the remaining 25%. So that will be good for you to know as you plan out your own expenses. So make sure you read over all these requirements and their details. They're in the guidelines and they're on our website. You feel free to reach out to me if you have any qualms at all about that. Sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming, but we can smooth it out. You have to be 18 years or older to apply for this grant. You need to be an Indiana resident for 1 year before the application deadline, and you need to plan to live in Indiana for the entire grant period. So until June 30th, 2021. You can't be a student enrolled in a degree granting program. You cannot request funds for something that another applicant is also requesting funds for. So you got to have independent projects. You can't be an individual advancement program fiscal year 19 grantee or fiscal year 18 grantee. And you have to apply for something that moves your career forward in one of the eligible disciplines. We fund projects in alternating years. We fund crafts, design, media arts, photography, and visual arts. This is what we're accepting currently this year. And we accept applications for folk artists and access artists in any of these eligible disciplines. Any questions so far?
All good so far, thank you.
Okay, we'll keep moving forward. So newish is this optional category of early career. If you feel like you meet this early career criteria here listed on the screen, you can opt into that additional category. So you would apply in any of these eligible disciplines back here. There we go. And then you might also, if you want to, opt into early career. The early career applicants are paneled separately from the rest of the applicants with panelists who have that kind of a perspective. Sometimes you need different things in earlier stages of your career than in other stages of your career. Totally optional. So if you believe that you fit the early career description, you're going to mark that in your application, and you'll be asked to answer one additional question to help us understand kind of where you're coming from in that. And then staff will review it and just confirm that you are eligible for that category. Some things you can request money for. Anything that supports your unique ideas, needs, and directions as an artist. Really, this is a very flexible grant. It might include supplies and equipment, facility rental, marketing and publicity, travel within the US, maybe workshop and training fees. You cannot spend these funds on outside travel outside the US, unfortunately. But again, very flexible, and if you have questions about what kind of stuff is eligible, just ask me. All right, so let's pause for a second. Do a little self-evaluation of your grant ideas. Are you applying in an eligible discipline? Are you hoping to move your career forward in one of those disciplines that I listed? And I will say, recognize that sometimes it's hard to make your work fit into those kind of buckets. And the point is to help make sure that our funds are reaching all kinds of artists. And so if you're unsure about if you're moving in that direction that we're asking for, then let's just talk about it. Is your project going to happen between July 1st, 2020 and June 30th, 2021? July 1st, 2020 and June 30th, 2021. Do you need other income in addition to this grant to make what you want to do to make it happen? You can do that. You can include other expenses if you need it, other income if you need it. Just think at this point, it's possible for me to pull this off with these funds or with others. Is there a question?
No, ma'am. Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and mute you. Sorry, I'm getting some background noise. Great. And finally, how does it help you reach your artistic career goals? You got to be able to explain that very clearly. So if those answers are still yes, let's keep talking. If you're not sure, let's still keep talking. Give me a call. So this is how the grant process works. You submit your application online, and then I train panelists, other Hoosiers who are artists and who are experts in your field, and generally in your artistic discipline or somewhere very close by to it. They come from all over the state, and they read each application very thoroughly. And what they're looking for is they're comparing it and scoring it to the review criteria, which I'll show you in just a moment. Then they're going to meet together as a group, and they're going to discuss the ways that they feel the application met the criteria really well, or the ways that it really needed to improve. And so they'll bounce their own thoughts off each other, and then their final scores will be informed by a broader discussion. It's not just in a vacuum. When they do that, the applications that score on average at least 75 points will be sent along as recommendations to our Board of Commissioners, who are a group of 15 people. You see just a few of them there in that photo. 15 people who have been appointed by the governor to oversee all of our work at the Indiana Arts Commission, and they actually make the final funding decision. So our funding process starts with citizens and ends with citizens. I'm here to help you make this happen, but staff does not have any input on what is funded and what's not. So finally, grants are awarded by this group of people. Okay, so panel meetings are scheduled for the week of April 13th, and they'll take place online. They are public meetings. They're actually you're going to be able to listen in on them if you want to. You're not required, through the same format that we're using today, Zoom. So I'll send you that information if you apply, how you can access a panel meeting and listen in, but you are not making your case in front of this panel meeting, in front of this panel. You're just listening to them read what you've already submitted in an application. This program usually funds anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 of the applications it receives. It's very competitive, but there's still a great chance in the scope of arts funding. It's still a very good probability that you will be funded. Okay, so with this in mind, my first tip for writing a strong application is to use the criteria to self-evaluate. Like I said before, panelists are trained to evaluate your project against the criteria, and you're going to need to read these closely before you start your application, and then again before you submit to make sure you've hit all the boxes. So let's take a look at these a little bit more closely. There are 4 major criteria. We're looking for impact on your career development, public benefit and community engagement, feasibility of the project, and the quality of the artist's work. These together total 100 points. And remember, you have to reach at least 75 to be considered for funding. And then what the recommendations will be, our commission will likely fund the highest scores until the funding runs out, but you have to score at least 75 to be eligible. I'm not going to go through these in depth, but just broadly, I'll give you a sense of what we're looking for. An impact on the artist's career development. You need to provide a clear description of your career stage, clear description of the project, and need to show how it positively supports your own growth. And we want to see goals. We want to see that you know when you can get there. Next is public benefit and community engagement. I kind of already mentioned a little bit of what we're looking for in community engagement and how you can learn more about that. But in general, we're looking for activities that are open to the public or directed toward a specific Indiana audience. So something has to be either open to the public or you are focusing it on a community in Indiana. Maybe that's a neighborhood, maybe that's a group of folks around a common interest. And then secondly, those activities need to incorporate active, two-way, and meaningful ongoing engagement. Exactly what I talked about earlier. Next, we're looking for feasibility. Can you do it with the timeline you've set out for yourself? And does it make sense based on the resources you have allocated? So that includes the grant funding, but you may have other resources above and beyond the grant. And if your project is bigger than what the grant can cover, show us that you have the resources to pull it off in other places. In quality of the artist's work, we want to see your experience. So through an artist's resume, we want to see your educational background and any other employment that's related to this project. That might be primarily your artistic experience, but maybe you're proposing something that is also relevant to show us that you have experience working with kids, or you have experience working in landscape architecture, landscape artistry maybe. So it can be a little bit broader than that, and I'd be happy to take a look at your resume if you want advice on what you should include or what you don't need to include. We're also looking for documentation of your work. I'll show you in a little bit what exactly we're looking for there, what the requirements are in the application, but we want to see something, we want to know that you have, the panel will want to know that you have the skills necessary to pull off what you're doing, what you're proposing to do. And then finally, a well put together application will help you in the end. So make sure that things are clear, all your materials have been put together well, and that the reviewer has a reasonably easy time interpreting what you're communicating. Before I move on to show you the online system, do you have any questions about criteria, funding process, or anything else so far?
Yes, Anna.
Mm-hmm.
I read somewhere that we're asked to address diversity, inclusion, equity, and access. And I know that the big Indiana Homecoming really focused on that theme. I'm wondering if there are any guidelines or examples or descriptions that are available as a resource to us.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Let me show you. I think what you're thinking of is kind of the way that we ask you to go about community engagement and why. It's important that all people have the ability and opportunity to experience arts and culture in Indiana. And sometimes that takes really intentional strategies for inclusion. And community engagement is certainly one of the ways that can happen. In this program, there's no specific requirement to reach out to anyone individually, but that's kind of the heart of where that's coming from.
Okay, but if you do want to,
yes, right.
Work
Having
on
said that, let's take a look over here. I would recommend starting on this community engagement page, see if that is useful to you. There's a few different types of resources here. Questionnaire to aid in understanding your community could be a great one that just helps start that conversation. I will say though, ultimately, there are certainly some best practices for inclusion and for being mindful of diversity and seeing it kind of in your own work. But there's never going to be one checklist for things you should do, right? This is the hard work. This is the showing up, really being critical of ourselves and looking for ways to continue to unpack our own biases and to open up our work to folks who you see as maybe wanting to be a part of it and are unable to. So take a look at this page first, and then reach out to me if you haven't found really what you're looking for or you don't know how to start. And let's talk about it together.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Were there other questions? Someone is raising their hand. I don't know if you are unable to mute yourself, then go ahead and send it into the chat box and we'll come back to it later. Okay, great. Good questions. So let's take a look at the online system. This would be your next step. If you're feeling ready to apply, what you're going to want to do is go to in.gov/arts/apply. Let me flip back to this slide. This link will take you directly to this login page. Okay. Sorry, someone is still raising their hand and I don't want to ignore you, but I'm not sure. Whoever's on an iPhone is raising their hand. Maybe you can't unmute yourself, but go ahead and send it in the chat box. So I've logged in here just as a fake account here. When I logged in, this is where I came to. This is the apply page. That's also this button right here. Will get me there. From here, I can see all the stuff that's already open, that's accepting applications right now. So you see the individual advancement program, that's this grant. And then scrolling on down, have you thought about applying for on-ramp yet? Check out that program. It's also relevant to the work that you're doing. It's especially relevant if you don't feel ready to apply for a grant yet. This could be a great starting point. It's a little bit wider view of what your creative career is and what the next steps for what you need. And then check out the other stuff that's open right now. This stuff changes throughout the year as our grants kind of go through cycles. So if I'm not ready to start an application yet, I just want to see what it looks like, I can click this preview button down at the bottom. And I come here to see exactly what the application is. This won't save any of the things that I type into it, just a heads up if I'm in the preview mode. You can tell I'm in preview mode right here. I'm actually going to go back and start an application. So start an application, click this blue apply button in the top right. Here we are. I'm not going to go through this whole application step by step. You're going to want to get in there, get your hands dirty, check some things out. If you're having trouble with anything, let me know. But I am going to hit on a few major things that I want to give you tips on how to write a strong response to. You can see here that this application is giving you some tips, right? Check out the guidelines, good tip. Know the evaluation criteria. Here's a link to that defining community engagement video. And this webinar is going to be linked to you really soon. So moving through here, it's going to ask you some eligibility questions like we just discussed. You're going to fill out just a couple of data reporting questions that we're required to report to our federal funders, the National Endowment for the Arts. Moving into the real meat of the application here, I have put each of the evaluation criteria sections directly into the application so that you know what is most relevant, what reviewers will be looking at when they're scoring your application. Each one of these black bullet points is worth 10 points each, and that means that this total category is worth 30 points total. So let's just move right on through here. The artistic career status, this is where you want to give us a sense of that question I asked you earlier. Who am I as an artist right now? This is the first brush of what the panelists, how they'll get to know you, how they're understanding who's asking, who's going on here, like what's the project, the person who's proposing this project, what do they have under their belt, or what are they passionate about, or where are they looking ahead? So you can let yourself kind of shine here. You can show your personality in this place. Talk about your training, your recent projects, some notable things. You don't want to just list everything that's on your resume. You should really give some more life to what's already on your resume, or quote unquote resume, if that's not something that you have yet. The project description is where you want to tell the panelists exactly what you want to get done. I recommend that you start this question off with one sentence that shows exactly what you want to do. Summarize it first in one sentence, and then unpack that. How you'll use the funds. Let's say I'm requesting funding to put together put together a photography class for, I wish I came up with a better example before this, for the 4th graders in my hometown. Okay. Well, what's involved in that, right? You're not just going to show up and then expect that this class will happen. Unpack the phases of that. And first, I'm going to start researching what kind of other photography training is available to kids in that age in my region, maybe. Then I'm going to start building relationships with the teachers. Then I'm going to put together a curriculum together with the teachers to make sure that it's useful for them. By the way, that's community engagement. Then I'm going to put together all the materials. The materials will include this and this and this. Timelines are really helpful. Bullet point lists are really helpful. So you don't have to fill all of this character count here. Brevity and clarity are so highly valued by panelists. Bullet points are fine. Just clear timelines of January through March, research, things like that. This next section is really where you want to connect what you want to get done in this project to how it will actually help you move forward in your career. Be really obvious about that. Don't assume that panelists will be able to connect the dots. If I do this photography class, then I'll be able to actually expand my wedding photography business into a little bit more of a skill. And that's going to help me make up for some lost revenue in the winter when it's not wedding season. Maybe that's how I want to build my career. If you don't have an artist resume, this is the perfect time to start building one. Here's a great example of one. Oh, I thought I linked a great example of one. I'm going to change this. So you have a link in here to College Art Association, has really helpful guidelines and templates for artist resumes. You'll want to upload artistic documentation. I've given you some specific outlines here of what this should be. You need to have created it. It needs to be no more than 3 years old. It needs to be relevant to what you're proposing. You can submit up to 10 images, up to 5 minutes of some kind of video or audio, or up to 10 pages of writing. So one of those 3 options you can submit. And note that this system will only allow you to upload one individual file. But in the case of if you're uploading 10 images, you can consolidate that into a PDF of 10 pages of a single full-size image. Or if you'd rather, instead of uploading a file, you can submit a link to something like Dropbox or SoundCloud or Vimeo, and you'll just paste that here. Make sure that the link that you paste here can be accessed by anyone. It doesn't require a special invitation or email. It needs to be set to public. I check all of these before I send them on to panelists, and so if I have any trouble getting to it, I'll make sure I get in touch with you to correct that before it gets to the panel. But it's good for you to read through that before you submit. Put your best foot forward. Next, we're going to ask you about community engagement and public benefit. This is the same as what we've just talked about before. What community engagement is and why it matters, why we are asking you to think about it in this career development project. We're going to ask you, how is it going to be open to the public or directed to a specific Indiana audience? And then tell us really who you think that is. Your work is probably relevant to everyone, but that's not a great way to approach this type of strategy. Hone in who you either want to build a relationship with or who you believe cares a lot about your work that you want to keep deepening that relationship with. So is it people who live in Northeast Indiana? Is it the Amish community? Is it your state legislators? I don't know. And then explain how you're going to invite them into that process with you. Do you already have connections? Is it going to be cold calls? Are they going to magically find out about your work through social media? Is that how that works? That's a whole different art, right? And then tell us about what the active, two-way, meaningful, ongoing engagement will be with that audience. Is it that they're actually going to create with you? Are you going to create a community piece together with your ceramic skills? Are you going to interview them ahead of time. By the way, make sure they know what they're being interviewed for, that it's going to be part of a piece of art, right? That's the way you're going. Are you going to ask them to help you co-design your process? Is the group that you want to build a relationship with, are they the glass blowers of Indiana? And why do they want to have a partnership with you as a lighting set designer, maybe? Then finally, we're getting into the nitty-gritty here. Project management. This is show the panel that you've got what it takes to do what you want to do, or that you're bringing in other people or resources to make sure that it can happen. So this is a great place for your timelines. This is a great place to show that you've planned out every step. How do I fly to the moon? Well, first, I have to find a spacesuit. Well, next, I probably should learn some astrophysics, right? Okay, but really like plan things out from start to finish in every detail. Again, this is only 2,500 characters, so bulleted lists and timelines are great. Just make sure that you're showing that you have been thoughtful about the fact that you can pull this off. We know there's some gray area, and there's definitely a little bit of flexibility and trust involved in all of this, but at the end of the day, these are taxpayer dollars, and we're trying to be really responsible with stewarding that to projects that will confidently say what they're going to do what they say they're going to do. In your budget, we're looking for a basic line-by-line budget of the major resources going into the project and the major areas that you're spending funding on. So for example, you definitely need to include your grant request. That might be up to $2,000. So you'll type $2,000 ISC grant request in there. Maybe that's all you need to pull this off. That's great. Maybe you are contributing some of your own funding into this. Personal cash contribution, that's great. Maybe you're planning to earn something on this project that will actually kind of cover the cost of it in the end. That's great. It might be something like ticket fees. It might be something like commissions. It might be new memberships, new subscriptions to your CSA. Then you're going to total up that whole income, all of those lines of income, and total it here. Next, you're going to show us exactly what you're going to spend that money on. Be as detailed as you, I think probably be as detailed as you can in this case. It's better to have slightly too much information than not enough. It will give the panel more confidence. You can see here, I've given you an example. Overall, I think I'm expecting to spend $750 on travel for the workshop I'm attending, and I'm estimating that based on, typically hotels run $150 a night at this place, and mileage, I just decided randomly to calculate it at state rate. You don't have to, it's not required, but it helps the panelists imagine what you're spending that money on. If you're purchasing a piece of equipment, it's a good idea to really be specific about what piece of equipment that is. And you might even decide to link out to like an Amazon page or a quote to show that that's a reasonable expense to allocate toward that piece of equipment. Then you're going to total all of your expenses listed here and type it here. This number, your expenses, should be the same number as your total projected income. So you should have exactly the amount of cash on hand to cover the exact amount of expenses that you're proposing. So if I have, let's do quick math here. Oh crap, 2,500 plus 750 is like 3,250. Oh God. I'm in the arts, I think that's right. If I have that much of expenses, then I should also have planned to have that much in income here. The exact amount. Then we get down to in-kind. In-kind's a little bit different. In-kind is the cash value of anything that others have contributed to the project, not you. Remember up here, if you are contributing cash to the project, that comes in as income. So let's say somebody is not going to charge you for the venue. Awesome. Estimate what that is and throw it in here. Let's say you have some volunteer hours coming in for help putting the space together. Cool. You can value that in whatever you want and put it in here, and then just total that here. That's actually just one number that's not, doesn't get included in expenses or income, because in kind is both itself an income and an expense. Now I'm probably confusing you, and that's okay. Budgets, you'll get here, you'll be able to list it out, and you'll just call me if you have any questions. The budget explanation is a good place to list any other additional information, like if you want to list that Amazon link to the piece of equipment that you were planning to purchase, or if you want to talk about how you decided how to break down your own artist fee. Remember, you can pay yourself in this. You should be earning money. That is what your job is. But it's a good idea to show that that's a reasonable hourly rate or commission rate for you. That's a good place for it here. That's really the meat of the application. There's a few more questions here to help us understand where you're coming from, but that's the bulk of it. And so, like I said, brevity and clarity will be your best friends. What questions do you have about the content of the application, just based on what you've seen so far?
Anna, somewhere in there it asks if this is an art education activity. Is that just collecting data, or is that something that's preferred?
It does not impact your funding at all. It's just data collection.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. Other questions? Okay. Well, I have a few more tips for you. Know your goal and relate everything back to it. You can do that in the application. You saw how we ask you to describe who you are now, what your goals are, and then connect the dots really clearly between them. So this is especially good to remember in terms of community engagement. Community engagement is something that takes your goal to the next level. It shouldn't distract you from it. So look for those relationships or those connections that need to be invested in that are related to this. If it starts to feel like that community engagement requirement is really like an add-on project to what you really need to get done, then let's have a conversation, because that's not what really what we want. We want you to have a more successful experience. Tip number 3 is watch that defining community engagement video. That was the video that got blocked by the state of Indiana internet filter, but you'll be able to get to it. It's about 13 minutes long, and it's specific to this program. It really walks you through exactly how you can find or build in some level of community engagement at different types, in different phases of your project and in different ways. In fact, you probably are already doing this. It's probably something that you'll be watching and you're like, that's, of course, why wouldn't I do that? Awesome, I'm so glad you're at that point. And so sometimes it's just about understanding what we're looking for and how to communicate that well, and valuing that that's part of your process. We want to brag on you. We want to hear about those things that you're doing. And fourth, your activities and your timeline and your budget should reinforce each other. There should never be Easter eggs hidden throughout the application. If you need to repeat information because you feel like, well, it was relevant there, is it relevant here too? Yeah, it probably is. Make sure you're clear and brief, have brevity, but if you are proposing to do some activities like maybe you're doing a workshop and then you're coming back and pulling a group of artists together to experiment with this new technique that you just learned. And we see that you've budgeted for the workshop, the travel, the food involved in that, but then it's not clear, are you going to have the materials to do the artist meetup when you get back home? Make sure that you include all of those things and all of the elements of make sure that the activities you're talking about, you're clearly budgeting for them as well, and vice versa. If there's something in your budget that you haven't talked about yet in the application, that's going to be a red flag for a panel. Finally, have someone else read your application before you submit it. Preferably somebody who doesn't know you super, super, super well. Make sure that they can understand what you're asking. Typos are, it's just a lot. It's a lot of typing, and so you're probably going to have some of that. Make sure that they can access the links that you submit in there, and that your documents look beautiful. That person could be me. I will review your application. If this is the first time that you're applying to this program, then, and you want me to review your application before it gets to the panel to give you any feedback, suggestions for making it stronger, then what you need to do is fill it out completely online, everything filled out. Just don't hit submit yet. I can access it on the back end. I can see everything without you submitting it. Then email me no later than January 23rd, 4:30 p.m. and I'm going to take a look at it. It might take me a couple of days. I often get a lot of these, which is just fine, but sometimes I'll get backlogged. Then I'll email you when my draft is complete, and I'll actually just enter in comments right underneath some of your questions. The things I have comments about, they'll appear right underneath the question that it's relevant to. And we'll be the only people who can see those comments. It won't appear to panelists. So usually I'll just erase it after you've submitted it. But then once you can make any changes you need to because you haven't hit submit yet. And then whenever you're ready, then you hit submit before the deadline. So here's what's next. If you don't already have an account in our online system, start one. There's a little bit of information to fill out on the front end. Don't get scared by that. Sorry, that's kind of a lot of fields, but all important information. Make sure you watch Defining Community Engagement. Don't forget to submit your application, February 6, 2020, 4:30 p.m. And then you can just be aware that the panel meetings is April 13th, the week of. I'll send you more information about how you can observe those panels. And then you'll find out if you've been funded or not after our Board of Commissioners meets. It will probably be mid to late June before you hear, and it will be by email. So get started. It's a perfect dreary night to sit in with your tea or your wine and start a grant application. And don't forget that we're really excited for you to get started on these projects. I love my job. It is my favorite thing to be able to give you, to be excited for you. I'm very easy. I believe in you already. I'm very easy to get excited about the things that you're excited about. So have fun with this. No matter what happens at the end of this, I hope that you feel like this is drawing out some ideas for you, putting some pieces together. You will get feedback on your application, whether you're funded or not. And I hope that that is useful to you. So have fun with this and don't lose the passion of it in it, because grant writing can get a little dreary. I don't know why. I love grant writing. I love reading grant applications. Always call me if you have questions or are starting to feel confused or overwhelmed about anything. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. I'll stick around for a few more minutes if you have other questions. Let me check the chat box first, just in case I missed anybody. And a reminder, this meeting has been recorded and it will be posted online. I'll send it around. It'll be linked in the application so you can see everything again. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Bye, Brian.